Hi, everyone. We are going to go ahead and get started today. Welcome to the webinar. My name is Emily Cohen, and I am the program coordinator here at Faith Trust Institute. And we are joined today by Reverend Al Miles, who will be presenting today on teen dating violence, what every parent needs to know. February is Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month, and we thank you for taking time today to join us for this presentation and to be part of our conversations this month on teen dating violence and healthy relationships. I will be introducing Reverend Miles in a moment, but first, a little bit about how this will work today. In terms of logistics, you should now be hearing me through your telephone, and you should be seeing the title of the webinar on your computer screen. If you are having technical problems, you can send me a direct message by finding my name in the drop-down menu of the chat box, which should be on the right side of your screen. And once we get going today, I can help you troubleshoot. Another thing, in terms of asking questions to Reverend Miles, he will be taking time throughout the presentation to address your questions. So please do send them in at any point, and you can send them in by either using the chat box or the Q&A box on the right side of your screen. So go ahead and send those anytime, and then I will hold on to them until we break for questions. Another thing to note is that a handout of these slides that will be used today will be sent to you in an email later this afternoon. So you'll be able to access information and the links and the resources that are presented today. And lastly, we are recording this webinar to make it available on our website soon. So welcome also to those of you who are joining us by listening to the recording. A note about this particular webinar, this is part of a series of webinars sponsored by the Lutheran Community Foundation as part of their Ending Family Violence initiative. We are happy to say that the LCF will be sponsoring 12 webinars in 2013, and this is the second in the series. The LCF is committed to providing tools and resources to faith leaders and congregations to address issues surrounding domestic violence. So please take a look at thelcf.org, and you can read more about the initiative and the other great work that they are doing. So many thanks to the LCF. I'll now pass it over to our presenter, Reverend Al Miles. Reverend Miles was ordained in the Church of God in 1983 in Anderson, Indiana. And since 1993, he has worked for Pacific Health Ministry at the Queens Medical Center in Honolulu. He is an ethics consultant and chair of the hospital's ethics committee and serves as the coordinator of the hospital ministry department. He speaks frequently to nationwide audiences from a wide variety of fields on domestic violence and teen dating abuse awareness. Reverend Miles is the author of Domestic Violence, What Every Pastor Needs to Know, as well as Ending Violence in Teen Dating Relationships, a resource guide for parents and pastors. So welcome to Reverend Miles, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Emily, and thank everyone for joining us today. A special thanks to Faith Trust Institute for allowing me for the past several years to be a partner with them in their important work. What we're going to do today, as Emily said, we're going to talk about teen dating violence awareness and what parents need to know. And I know that we have also on the call youth ministers and advocates and other people who work with teens and parents, so I will try to address as much as can be addressed in this hour. Can we please have this next slide, Emily? Let's begin by talking about what constitutes teen dating violence. It's controlling, abusive, and aggressive behavior in a romantic relationship and can include verbal, emotional, physical, sexual, or spiritual abuse, or a combination of these. It's important to note that the abuse can occur between teens or between a teen and an adult. We will oftentimes see in teen dating violence, especially females who are being abused, they are often being abused by an older teen or even an adult male, ages 20 through, I've seen teens being abused in a so-called romantic relationship by men in their 60s. Next slide, please. The problem exists in all cultures, races, religions, and socioeconomic classes. The reason that's important to note is because oftentimes I would have heard from parents and from ministers that I know it's a problem, but it doesn't happen in my culture or my race or my religion. And it certainly doesn't happen with people who are middle class and upper class. And none of this is true. It happens in all cultures, races, religions, and socioeconomic classes. Both females and males are victimized. Girls are more likely than our boys to yell, to threaten to hurt themselves, to pinch, to slap, to scratch, or to kick their partners. Boys injure girls more and are more likely to punch with force, and they participate by far greater than do girls in unwanted sexual activity. Next slide. Some teens are victimized occasionally, and others are often, sometimes even daily. Some of the statistics according to the Dating Violence Resource Center: 40% of teenage girls ages 14 through 17 report knowing someone their age who has been hit or beaten by a boyfriend. 50 to 80% of teens, both boys and girls, report knowing someone involved in a violent relationship. Next slide, please. Young women ages 16 through 24 experience the highest rates of relationship violence, and that's not just physical violence, sexual violence, emotional violence, and other forms of violence that we'll be talking about in a few minutes. And a very important statistic, date rape accounts for almost 70% of sexual assaults reported by adolescent and teenage women. Next slide, please. When we talk about tactics, you'll note that we have verbal abuse as the first tactic. Verbal abuse is actually an emotional abusive tactic, but I wanted to tease that out a little bit because in teens there's a uniqueness that happens that doesn't occur often in adult intimate partner violence. And let's start right there. Verbal abuse actually consists of a realm of things, and one of those things is the disrespectful names that teen boys will often use against teen girls. But teen girls use disrespectful language towards teen boys as well. I want to talk about a story that occurred, and it's actually cited in one of my books on teen dating violence awareness. I was at a lecture, and there were 40 Christian teens attending this particular lecture, and I had said to the teens, don't allow anyone, I was talking to the teen girls, don't allow anyone to call you a bitch, because that is not a term of endearment. It is indeed a term that puts down women, is disrespectful. And one of the teens, she raised her hand, and keep in mind, this was a group of Christian teens. She raised her hand and she said, Reverend Miles, I disagree. She said, bitch is a female dog. And my boyfriend loves dogs, so when he calls me a bitch, he must love me. And I was speechless for a second, and then I decided to ask the rest of the teens to respond. Several of the other teens, both female and male, said, I agree with her. Bitch is not a bad term. It's just like you used in your day, Reverend Miles, honey, baby, sweetheart. No one takes offense. And I remained quiet, and then I asked others to respond. And finally, a couple of the women said, oh, I disagree. I think that it's very offensive. And then some of the young men even spoke up and said, I think it shows no respect at all. But there was a lot of push and pull. And finally, the young woman who said, I find this disrespectful, said that if bitch is a term of endearment, then it's okay to call your mother or your grandmother a bitch. To which the group remained silent at first, and then I said, no, please speak up. And everyone in the room said, no, it wouldn't be okay to call my grandmother or my mother a bitch. And I said, why not, since it's supposed to be a term of endearment? And they did not respond. But wherever I traveled, both in religious circles and in secular circles, both in places of education, places of worship, and other secular places, Teens clearly know that I am not a teen. Most often they clearly know that I don't belong to their organization or their agency, and I hear teens disrespecting each other verbally. The aforementioned bitch, slut, whore, hoe, bastard, dickhead, punk, sissy, all these terms are used, and oftentimes when I'm speaking with teens, especially when I'm speaking with teens with no adults in the room, they will say it's a major problem, but it's not recognized as a major problem. And for those of you who are religious leaders on the call, please note that this happens among religious teens as it does with secular teens. Emotional abuse. Emotional abuse, well, certainly verbal abuse is an emotional abuse tactic, but emotional abuse also includes dictating what a intimate partner wears, who she or he can befriend, the time that she or he can spend with family, even the time that she or he can study or worship. Oftentimes in teenage relationships, when a partner, the abusive partner, seems to be jealous or possessive, many teens will misread that initially as showing how much they care, how much the person who's controlling cares. He's jealous, so that means he loves me. But that's not what that means at all. It means that he is often or she is often trying to control the person and isolate the person from the people, the places, the activities that mean most to the individual being victimized. Physical abuse tactics in teen dating relationships can be highlighted by an incident that happened when I was speaking in the mainland, and I was speaking to 50 teens. And once again, it was a religious group, mostly Christian, although there were some Jewish teens there as well. And I asked the teens, I said, give me a time when it's appropriate to use physical abuse tactics. This was only teens and myself there. And here's some of the things that the teen said to me. When she disappoints him, when he cheats on her, when she flirts with another guy, when he's being a jerk, when she disobeys him, when he calls her bad names, when she calls him a fag or a queer, when he hits her first, when she hits him first, when he doesn't pay enough attention to her. And finally, after this litany of justifications when physical abuse tactics could be employed, a few teens said it is never okay to use physical abuse tactics. The next tactic that I'm going to discuss is a tactic that many parents and religious leaders find difficult to discuss. It's sexual abuse and sexual assault. In fact, a Christian mother of a 15-year-old said to me at a conference, right before I started the conference, this was a couple of years ago, she said, you know, somehow, Reverend Miles, I keep telling myself that if my daughter doesn't have sex until she's married, then there's no need to worry about some boy sexually abusing or assaulting her. And that's a very common statement. There's this widespread belief that the problem is related to consensual sexual activity or solely sexual intercourse, or the problem is related to a time-worn myth that is very disturbing and is very common even in 2013, that sexual abuse and sexual assault are caused by what a young woman is wearing, what she's doing, what she's saying. The other thing that happens in sexual abuse and sexual assault tactics, many parents and religious leaders have often said to me, well, if the teen just promises abstinence, if she or he wears a promise ring that they will not be involved in sexual activity before marriage, they will not have to worry about being sexually assaulted or sexually abused. And that's of course, inaccurate. In teen dating relationships, there are many manifestations of sexual abuse and sexual assault. What we have a lot of times is a teen, both male and female, who has decided for himself or herself that they wanted to wait to have sexual intercourse. And in girl teens, a lot of times they are told by their male partners that, okay, we can wait. I'm going to be respectful to you. I will not pressure you to have sex with me. I will not pressure you at all. So just give me a blowjob or a hand job. Or let's have anal sex and it won't be considered sex. And with boy teens, a lot of times, which ties into another form of bigotry that happens a lot in our country, and that is the bigotry towards people who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. With boy teens, a lot of times, there was a teen who told me one time, he was 18 years old, and he said, I have decided upon my own that I want to wait until I'm in a committed relationship. He didn't mention marriage, he just said in a committed relationship, and I'm going to marry this person before I become sexually involved with her. But he came to me to confess, and he said, I feel really badly, Reverend Miles, because what she said last night was, she said, are you gay? And he says, no, I'm not gay. Well, you must be gay because you're not going to have sex with me before we're married. And he said, no, I'm not gay. Well, prove it. And, of course, he said, I got sucked in and we had sex and I feel terrible. Sexual abuse and sexual assault also consists of some myths that can really be dangerous to teens. Many teens have told me over the years that they engage in sexual activity, not necessarily sexual intercourse, but oral and anal sex, mutual masturbation. They get involved in a lot of different sexual activity, and particularly oral and anal sex, and they say, but since we're not having sexual intercourse, I can't get a sexually transmitted infection or disease, which is, of course, not true. Younger teen females oftentimes are tricked by older teen and adult males into saying such things as, well, if we have sex in the shower, you can't get pregnant. Not true. If we have sex standing up, you can't get pregnant. Not true. If you don't have sex with me, I'll go out with so-and-so and so-and-so, other females. And again, the young teen is tricked and coerced into having sex. Sexuality does need to be talked about by parents, and there should be a number of classes within our religious institutions and our secular institutions where teens can talk openly about human sexuality. As I mentioned before, there's oftentimes where people will say, the teens will say to me, I want to talk to adults, not necessarily my parents, but I do want to talk to adults about human sexuality, but very few parents or other adults will talk with me about this. Leaving the teen to talk to other teens about these issues, and a lot of times those teens are just as unknowledgeable about the issues and just as frustrated about the issues as other teens. One other thing about sexual abuse, sexual assault that needs to be mentioned here. Finish up a talk in front of 1,000 teens one time. 2 young women approached me, and we were standing there alone, and the one said, Reverend Miles, pointing to her friend, she was raped by her boyfriend last night. This morning, we went to my mom to tell my mom about the sexual assault, and my mom walked away from us saying, well, she should not have had sex in the first place. I want parents and religious leaders and everybody else on the call to note that that is not consensual sexual activity. That is a crime. Sexual assault and rape are crimes, and we should never confuse those with consensual sexual activity. Before we get into spiritual abuse and technological misuse, Emily, I want to turn to see if there are any questions that need to be addressed.
There are not questions at the moment, but I just sent a message to everyone to let them know that they can type in their questions into the chat box or the Q&A box.
Okay,
thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I want to jump to technological misuse and then come back to spiritual abuse. When I was first researching teen dating violence awareness about 13 years ago, it's amazing because most people did not have computers, home computers, or cell phones, so there were no text messages and all the other wonderful things of technology. And in the first book that I wrote about teen dating violence awareness in 2002, we talked a lot about beepers, pagers. And by the time I wrote the second book, the one that was cited earlier, Ending Violence in Teen Dating Relationships, beepers were passé, except for people working in hospitals and other professions, a few other professions. And all of a sudden, this big boom of computer use, of Facebook, used to be MySpace, and now all kinds of things, and of course, cell phones with texting and sexting. Technological advances have been a wonderful thing for society for the most part, but they've also brought some special challenges. In dating violence relationships, oftentimes the abusive partner will set up a structure that is not helpful to the victimized teen. In the case when there's a boy teen who's the perpetrator, he will say, I'm going to call you and you need to call me back every half an hour. Oftentimes the reason it is given is because I love you so much and I don't want to lose contact with you. Or when I text you, no matter what you're doing, no matter what time of the day, and this can be at night when the girl teen is to be asleep, you need to text me back right away to tell me how much you love me. And of course, the technology then is used against the victim survivor. A 19-year-old came to my office to talk about her boyfriend. And we had sat in my office for 10 minutes, and I began to count the number of beeps I heard from her, and I said, who keeps texting you? There had to be about 20 beeps in that 10-minute period of time. I said, who keeps texting you? She said, it's my boyfriend. And I said, how does that make you feel? Does he know that you're here talking to me right now? And she said, yes. She said, he likes to keep in contact with me just to show me how much he loves me. I said, you've given me a different answer. I said, what I'm asking you, young woman, is how does it make you feel when he texts you these many times? She says, I feel imprisoned. I feel trapped. So oftentimes, the perpetrating teen will use technology against the victim survivor. What parents need to take heed of is oftentimes the parents will say, I've got this down pat, Reverend Miles. I know exactly what my teen is doing all the times, which is really hard to believe that we know we can track anybody that all the time. But parents have told me that we keep our home computer in the family room where everybody can see the computer. Or my daughter and son, they're on our cell phone plan, so we know exactly who they hear from all the time. And when I tell teens this at conferences, they will often laugh and say, no, they don't have any idea when I'm saying I'm doing homework, who I'm texting. One teen girl said, my boyfriend sends me nude pictures of himself, and my mom and dad, I say, oh, he's just saying, I hope you have a good time studying. So we need to really be careful and monitor more closely what our teens are involved in technologically. The advances are tremendous and rapid, and we can't always keep up with it, but it's very important to note that technology can be used and misused. I said I wanted to hold off on talking about spiritual abuse tactics, and this is to everyone on the call, because even if you're not from a religious tradition, you will probably work with teens who are from religious traditions. And if you're a parent who is in a religious tradition or not, they still will interface with people who are in different spiritual religious traditions. Spiritual abuse occurs when there's a misuse of divine beings, of sacred text, of religious doctrine to establish power and control over a victim, survivor. Though certainly spiritual abuse can be used against male victim survivors, spiritual abuse is most oftenly employed against females, both in teen and adult relationships. Somehow, many males will say, and this includes religious leaders, that simply because of being a male, boys and men have been given special dispensation by God to lord over, rule over, have authority over females. Somehow, and it's never fully explained, by the misappropriation of Scripture or the outright misquoting of Scripture, females are told, both girls and adults, that they have to submit, and not only submit, but submit graciously to the authority, the alleged God-given authority of males. So I have teen girls who will even tell me, even when they're not married, they will even cite the passage in the Christian scripture, Ephesians 5:21 through 33, that talk about males as the head of the household and females should submit graciously, which, by the way, is not the correct rendering of that text. And this is not a webinar on theological discussion, but it's important to note that that text has been misused. But many females tell me, I have to obey him, and as I said, even when they're not married, they get into that. And they told me they've been told that by their parents, by their pastors, clergy people, youth ministers, youth workers, by society in general. And what it sets up is an imbalance in what ought to be a balanced relationship between two equal, respected individuals. In spiritual abuse tactics, the imbalance comes because somehow this figure, this divine figure, oftentimes cited as a male divine figure, gives male privilege and male entitlement to men and boys and subjugates women and girls. And that certainly, while not causing teen dating violence, can also contribute to giving a gateway that men and boys feel justified over abusing women and girls. So it's important. I'm challenging both parents and pastors to be careful of the messages that they give their sons and daughters around spirituality. Emily, are there any questions before we move on?
There is one question going back to the bullet point on sexual abuse and sexual assault in terms of you referencing addressing sexual assault in an abstinence-only setting and how to separate or the need to separate the crime of sexual assault from consensual sexual activity. And the person's question is, do you have suggestions for how to educate the congregation on these differences? This has been a problem in our congregation, which teaches abstinence-only sexual education.
Excellent question. My suggestion would be to bring in resources. You'll hear me talk about, a little later, you'll hear me talk about the importance of having a collaborative approach to teen dating violence awareness. And the collaborative approach to bring in people from the greater community, greater meaning larger community, to talk about human sexuality, to talk about that we are all sexual beings as we're all spiritual beings, as we're all physical beings. And to the person who raised the question, I too have run into situations where people will say, we don't want you to come in and talk about sexuality here at this talk in our congregation because we have good teens, and when you talk about this, Reverend Miles, it's going to make our teens want to have sexual intercourse. And I try my best to be respectful of the question, but the question really doesn't fully make sense because we are sexual beings. And by the way, let me say that for those of us who are reaching back as parents and religious leaders, think about how we thought about sexuality, sex, desire when we were 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and so forth. The reality is, back to the question, it's going to be very important for that congregation and our congregation to talk about sexuality, human sexuality, as a beautiful gift. If we're talking about congregations, a beautiful gift from the divine, how we cite the divine, how it's a beautiful gift. The thing that we need to do separate from that is to say, or in addition to that, to say, but there are people who will want to rob us of our right to say no, our right to say when I will and will not become sexual with a person, when I will and will not become physical with a person. And I think that's very critical because a lot of times congregations will say to me, but if you don't, as I said before, don't talk about it at all and then everything is going to be okay. Now, of course, when teens say to me, that's ridiculous, that's their words. But in fact, of course we think about this and we need adults to tell us, to help us with this issue and not walk away and not say, don't think about it until you're married. Again, the comment that I go back to of oftentimes when religious leaders will say, well, we're a congregation that believes in purity, I will say, what does that mean? Please help me understand what that means. Well, that means our kids wait to have sex until they're married, which obviously I differ with that kind of assessment of purity because there's nothing impure, improper about thinking about our sexual selves as we think about our spiritual selves, as we think about our physical selves. Any other questions, Emily?
Nope, not right now. We can go ahead to warning signs.
Yeah, warning signs. I want to start with what actually I put at the end of this slide, and then I'll reiterate when I get to the end of the slides about warning signs. Not all of these signs will point to that a teen is being abused. And I'll explain why. I'll explain why when we get to the end of the warning signs. But here's some of the warning signs that parents need to be on the watch for, and everybody else on the call as well. A radical change in behavior. The teen seems anxious, depressed, hypersensitive, withdrawn, especially if this teen was at once outgrowing, very comfortable in his or her skin, seemed very happy, and all of a sudden we touch them and they just seem to jump. Or there's the dropping of a skillet and they seem to act like a bomb went off. And it's a radical change from the way they were previously. They cease to enjoy activities that they once really loved. In one of the books, I quote author Barry Levy, who's an expert in the field of teen dating violence awareness, and she says, it's the teen girl who comes home or says to a friend, well, I don't want to be a cheerleader anymore because Bobby says that cheerleaders are sluts, and I don't want to be a slut, so therefore I'm going to stop being a cheerleader, even though she enjoys that activity. The teen distances herself or himself from family and friends, and once again, especially if the teen previously enjoyed a close relationship with these particular individuals. A decrease in academic performance. Next slide, please. The teen seems uninterested in physical appearance or personal hygiene. The teen appears to dress inappropriately for the season or the situation. It's wearing coats and heavy jackets and sweaters and sweatshirts in summer weather, wears sunglasses on a cloudy day, rainy day, or indoors, and seems to have become very secretive. Next slide. We talked about this before, but it's worth repeating again and again. The teen receives an inordinate amount of phone calls or text messages from the dating partner, or the partner always seems to be around. It's the mother who came to me about 6 months ago and said, my daughter and I have girl days, girl nights out. We just love to get together, and we go to get massages, or we go practice Zumba. We do all these kind of things together, and all of a sudden her boyfriend appears there, or my daughter seems distracted, and all of a sudden I see him looking into the window where we're shopping. At least that's a warning sign that he or she's always around. The teen seems afraid of the dating partner or defends the dating partner's bad behavior. So the teen is called a bitch or a slut or a bastard or a dickhead, and when confronted by the parent, the teen actually offers a defense of why she or he will call these disrespectful names. This is certainly a common warning sign. The next one has unexplained bruises or offers unbelievable or vague explanations for the bruises. A teen walked into my office and her feet were bloody. She had on flip-flops, these rubber slippers, and her feet were swollen so she could barely even put on the flip-flops. And when I asked her what happened, she said, I was walking across the beach and stepped on glass. Now that was unbelievable. And as I sat a little longer and I said, young woman, please tell me what happened to you. She said, my boyfriend threw me through a plate glass and he dragged me, and that's how my feet got cut. So the bruises are unexplained or unbelievable. In one of the books, the teen mom, the mom of the teen said, my daughter said that the trunk popped open and hit her in the face, and yet the mark on her face looked like it was a fist mark. And finally, the teen did admit to her mom that the boyfriend had punched her in the face. Next slide. This is what I had said at the beginning of the warning signs, and it's worth repeating. It's important to understand that all the warning signs just discussed point to abuse. As teens move from the younger years to the late teens, a lot of times they will spend less time with mom and dad. Teens will have secrets from mom and dad. Most teens, even in healthy relationships. Teens oftentimes will change their dress from one dress to the next. As one mom said to me, I got a golf girl one day, I got a new age girl one day, I got a vintage 60s girl. I don't know who I'm going to see when she walks through the door. So that in and of itself won't necessarily say that the teen is being abused, but when we put it all together, the teen is getting all of these phone calls and text messages. She or he seems to be afraid of their partner. Unexplained bruises are on their body, and she or he is defending the bad behavior of the partner. We can be pretty sure that the teen is being abused. Next slide, please. Before we get into the guidelines, Emily, I want to check in again to see if there's anything from any of our listeners in terms of questions.
There are a couple questions. I'm not sure if you want to wait until after the parent slide, but I'll say them to you now. One of them is, as a parent, do you have suggestions for how to begin these conversations with my teen without it seeming like I am prying? That is one question.
Thank you for that question. Okay, go ahead. We'll answer that later.
Okay, and then the second question is from a youth minister who works a lot with the parents of the teens, and wondering if you could speak a little bit about some of the unique challenges in working with parents.
Okay. Both of those will be addressed after we give guidelines here. So let me go through the guidelines so we'll have enough time to address. Guidelines for parents, and this is not the exhaustive list. This is a list that actually I want to credit both teens and parents for helping me form this list when I was working on one of my writing projects. First and foremost, to recognize that the reality of teen dating violence occurs, and oftentimes, sadly and very frighteningly, it occurs within our own homes, neighborhoods, congregations. A lot of times what happens is parents, youth ministers will tell me, oh, I recognize that this is a reality, that it occurs in our society. Thank God, they will say, it doesn't occur in our home. It doesn't occur within our neighborhood or our congregation. It always happens someplace else. So we need to recognize that it does happen. So parents, please recognize that it could happen to your teens. Even though you raise your teens well and they're good boys and girls, it could still occur. Make the safety of a victimized teen the top priority. Sometimes what happens, and again, I want to address as a spiritual leaders, both parents and non-parents of teens, sometimes the top priority becomes, I want my daughter or son to be abstinent. I want my daughter or son to be a virgin when he or she gets married. I want my daughter and son to not think about their human sexuality until they get a certain age. One father joked with me, until my daughter gets 50, I don't want her to think about. That was a joke, somewhat. But the top priority needs to be the safety of the victimized teen, not what she's wearing or what he's wearing, or some of the people they hang with, though they're good people, I don't like the way they dress, or something like that. Make safety the top priority. Here's the question about how do I listen to and talk to your children. This is to the parent who raised the question about, I want to talk to my son or daughter, but I don't want to make it seem like I'm telling them what to do or not to do. It's very important that we address teens as young adults, not as little children. And the reason that's important, this is coming from the teens. Though it may be hard to believe, most teens that I've talked to over the past 13 years say, we do want our parents' input on our lives. We do want consultation from our parents. We do want to talk about human sexuality with our parents. And we want to talk about it with our coaches, with our teachers, with our youth ministers, with our senior pastors, but we want to have a voice in it. We really want to be able to be heard as well as to listen. So it's very important to talk to the children about things in an adult way. Very important, even if the teen says something, which teens probably will say something that we as parents have a disagreement on, it's very important that we listen. Use terms like, that's a very important point. I have a different point of view, not, I totally disagree with you. Where did you get this from? Don't ever raise this again. That won't help. Ultimatums will not help. I forbid you from seeing that jerk ever again, and will never bring up her name or his name ever again. That is not going to work. That will not work. It's important that when we're having discussion with our children about safety matters, explain why it may not be the most healthy, safe thing when a teen meets, and in this case I'll use female gender, a 16-year-old meets a young man online who says he's 21 years old, but the teen has never really met him. And the next thing, as the parent told me, within the next 2 days, he says to her, wear something sexy. The teen did talk to her mom about that, was somewhat confused about that, but also really felt good about somebody desiring her in a sexual way, made her feel like a woman, said the teen. And the mother said, I took a few gulps, but I said, the reason that this may not be a safe thing for you is because you don't know him well. You don't know what his values are. You've never met this person. And they were able to have a frank talk about that. So listening to and talking to the parent with the question is very important, but avoid ultimatums and judgmentalism, which gets into the next guideline, have candid and open discussions with teens about human sexuality. Again, to separate human sexuality as a natural, healthy, wholesome gift that all humans have from being raped, being assaulted. It's going to be very important. It's going to be very important that our parents, and youth ministers will be able to listen intently when a youth says, I'm really struggling because I really do want to be intimate. Intimacy may not mean sexual intercourse. I do want to be intimate with my boyfriend or girlfriend, and at the same time, I want to, quote, unquote, wait until I am married, to point to possible benefits, possible burdens to that decision-making, and let the teen speak openly. If a person, as one young woman, 17-year-old woman, told me, she said, ultimately, if I as a teen am going to have sex, I'm going to do it. But it's important to have an adult, particularly in her case, she said, my mom and dad, listen to me and listen to my arguments. But she said what I really appreciated is when they listened and differed and we agreed on things and not said, don't do that, I forbid you to do that. And once again, parents, youth ministers, others on the call, that tends not to work with the ultimatums. Maintain an open line of communication. Once again, as a mother said to me, I have to really decide what will be those go-to-the-mat, meaning those issues that I'm going to make an ultimatum and those issues that we can have some compromise on. If a teen, for instance, is in a dangerous relationship, it may be important to focus on her or his safety a lot more than she wears bowling shoes or she wears jeans with torn pockets, or I don't like that her hair is pink or purple. It's going to be more important to talk about the safety and keep the lines of communication open, even if we disagree. Next slide, please. We talked about this before, but it's important to stay apprised of what the teens are doing, online and offline, their relationships. If they get a new friend and all of a sudden that new friend seems to be every place and you know nothing about this young man or young woman, ask questions. But again, when you're asking questions, who is Sarah? Who is Tommy? Can you tell me a little bit more? I've never heard you actually talk about her or him before, versus, wow, that person looks like a creep. Again, we don't want to push that envelope that far and have the teen all of a sudden say, I'm being judged by mom and dad, by my youth pastor, by anybody, any other adult. And yet at the same time, it's very important to stay apprised of the websites that your teens are visiting. their friends, their activities. Very important to stay apprised. Recognize the far-reaching impact of abuse, not only on the teen currently, but a lot of the teens who have helped me are now adults who have helped me in my research, and those teens continue to talk about the impact physically, sexually, emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually on their well-being as a result of being abused. And it's very important to note that this is not something that's a passing fancy, and that it can really cause a great deal of scarring to a teen who experiences abuse. We've talked enough, not enough, but we said enough right now about focus on what's important. Again, keep an open mind. Use terms and words that show there's an openness to the discussion and not demands coming, I'm the adult and you don't know what you're talking about type of attitude will not be helpful. And it's very important for parents to seek support for themselves in the midst of all of this. There are a number of parents, having read my materials, who have contacted me on an ongoing basis to say, oh, that was a hard conversation here. What is she or he thinking? But they're saying it to me, not to the teen. Well, help me sort out what I might say here and not say there. It's important to seek the support of mental health counselors, of spiritual leaders, of professional chaplains to give the parents support. Now, to the youth minister, some unique challenges about working with parents. Again, it depends on what the parents are saying to you, Pastor. It depends on what the parents are asking. I can't fully respond to that, but do a lot of listening. Avoid such things. I get asked a lot of times by parents, if this were your son or daughter, what would you do here, Reverend Miles? That's a loaded question. I always turn that back around to say, my values may be different than your values. My approach may be different. My belief system may be different. So let's hear about what your values are or what your struggles are, and let's see how I can support you versus telling them what I believe. Even if the question is framed in a way, what does church, synagogue, temple, mosque say about this? What does our church, synagogue, temple, or mosque say about this belief? It's going to be very important to ask the parents their beliefs about things and listen a lot to the parents. If there's something that the parents are suggesting that may cause more friction than support, certainly say that. If there are things, one mom on a phone call last week was talking about her teenage daughter dating a guy who wasn't good for her, the mom said, or wasn't the guy that we would want her to date. And she said, so what I'm going to do is tell her that, you know, you got to make a decision. It's between us and them. I said, no, Mom, you don't want to do that because she might choose him. I'm going to stop again because we're running out of time. Emily, any other questions?
There is one question, and then we can take some time to go over the resources because I think that will be helpful also to some of the other questions here. A question in terms of intervening in a suspected abusive relationship. The question is, how do I help my teen daughter that I suspect is in an abusive relationship, but she seems she's hesitant every time I bring it up because I am her parent? What should I do, and what are some concrete steps that I should be aware of?
Concretely, when a daughter is in that kind of dangerous situation, stay close to her. Let her know that you're concerned about her. If you see something specific, name it. In other words, if you notice some unexplained bruises to this particular parent, I'm saying, say, I've been noticing that you have these bruises. Certainly name it. If he has called her out of her name, and again, I'm not talking about honey and sweetheart and baby. I'm talking about slut or whore or bitch, or he yells at her, or she seems afraid of him. Definitely say, I've noticed that you seem to be different when he's around, or he calls you names that really are disrespectful to you. So don't be afraid to name the things that are seen. Tell her how much you love her, how much you care for her. Tell her that she can talk to you at any time. You're going to be available to her. And again, let her know that you're concerned. But avoid, "You've got to end this right now," and avoid statements such as, "We raised you better than that," or "The daughter that we raised would never put up with that," because it seems shaming, and it also tends to be blaming her for something that she is actually trapped in. So the concrete steps, and also seek help in your area wherever you're joining us from, in terms of any agency that gets involved with advocacy around teen dating violence and abuse awareness. Emily?
Thank you. And then there are just a couple questions about suggested resources. So I think if we move ahead and you can talk about some of the resources, that will answer those questions.
Okay. If we move on to the resources. There are a lot of things out now that weren't out even 13 years ago. One of the resources, our current sponsor, Faith Trust Institute. You want to visit faithtrustinstitute.org, click on Teen Dating Violence Awareness, and you have a wealth of resources from Faith Trust. One of the resources that I'll talk about at the end of the resource section, I want to say just a little bit about now, is the 3-part DVD, Love, All That, and More. And the reason that's such an important resource is we have teens, both heterosexual and gay and lesbian teens, talking about healthy relationships, talking about what they would want out of relationships, talking about what they need from us adults, a vital resource. Also, loveisrespect.org has a number of resources for parents, for advocates, for teens in terms of healthy and respectful relationships. I mentioned Barry Levy earlier, certainly a person who's been very helpful to me in this cause. 2 of her books are listed there, Dating Violence, Young Women in Danger, and What Parents Need to Know About Dating Violence. I would get these resources and read them because they're very important resources. Next slide, please. My book that was cited by Emily earlier, Teen Dating Violence, a resource guide for parents and pastors, not only has a number of teens talking about survivorship after teen dating violence, but a number of youth pastors, youth workers, advocates talking about this issue and offering practical steps. And Dr. Jill Murray, But I Love Him, Protecting Your Teen Daughter from Controlling Abusive Dating Relationships, is a very important resource from HarperCollins, and both those 2 books are still in print and available. Next slide. I mentioned before Love, All That, and More, and this is a good place to conclude our webinar. It's a three video series featuring teens talking with teens about healthy relationships. It offers adults a window into the private world of teens and seeks to motivate all viewers to seek relationships based on equality and mutual respect. And that's a key as we talk about teen healthy relationships, as we talk about adult healthy relationships. They need to be based on equality and mutual respect for females and males. Thank you for joining us. And Emily, again, thanks to Faith Trust Institute and the fine work and letting me be a partner.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to Reverend Al Miles. We appreciate all your knowledge and insight on the topic, and especially for being here part of Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month. And as Reverend Miles mentioned, thank you also to the many of you who are online with us today for the live webinar, and those of you who will be joining us by listening to the recording. We appreciate you being part of this conversation. When you close the webinar window today, you'll be prompted to fill out a short survey, and you can just take a moment to do that and let us know any further questions you had or any ideas you have for us for future webinars. I do want to alert you to a webinar that we'll be having next week on Tuesday, February 12th, also part of Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month. Reverend Elizabeth Dilley will be presenting on the benefits and risks of social media as it relates to teen dating violence. So you can register for free for that online at faithtrustinstitute.org. And there you can also find the resources that Reverend Miles mentioned. We have a page on our front page. If you click on the Teen Dating Violence icon, you will be led to a page with more resources and things that you can download and resources in our store as well. So do take time to look at that. And as I mentioned, I will be sending you all a copy of the slides used today by Reverend Miles. You can return back to all of that information and links and resources. So once again, thank you for joining us, and this concludes today's presentation. Take care.